So welcome back to another Stuck in the Middle podcast episode. I am your host, Uncle AK. I know we haven't had a Stuck in the Middle podcast episode, but I mean, in a long time. But hey, trying to bring this back and bring it back with some fresh and warm minds out there. Before I introduce this episode, I just want to take the time to introduce my guest today, my two brothers, Joe and Tabot. I know you guys must have seen Tabot on Palm Central podcast, talking about B2 builders. He's the co-founder of that with his lovely wife. And Joe, man, you guys already know Joe now. Joe is a returner to Stuck in the Road podcast and Palm Central as well. But I'll give them a little chance to introduce themselves. So, Joe, I'll start with you. What's new with you? What's up with you? For those who don't know who Joe is, please introduce yourself to them.
Yes, my name is Joe. Man, I was on the podcast probably back in 2022 or 23, so it's been a hot minute. Currently a financial aid advisor at the University of Maryland, Baltimore down here. And just wanted to join back in the conversation. AI is impacting all of us, so it's definitely a hot topic, and it'll be interesting to hear just how it's impacting all of us and what we're excited about for the future.
Yeah, so guy said counselor, financial aid counselor. Look. Oh, let's talk about that. This student loans thing, man.
Yeah.
It's conversation that brings conversation. So thank you for letting me know that one. That's a good comment right there. So, Tabot, I beg.
Yes, sir.
Introduce yourself.
Yes. So happy to be back again. My name is Tabot Aritambe, product manager at Capital One, overseeing open banking initiatives and specifically focus on our new to credit population. So basically, we're trying to look at alternative data sources and use those alternative data sources to underwrite credit for those who are new to the credit ecosystem and trying to get that head start, with credit. Prior to that, worked in education for a long time. And like you mentioned, AK, I'm also the co-founder of B2 Builders, and you can see in the merch here together with my lovely wife.
If you guys haven't watched that episode, it will be somewhere in the show notes for you guys to reference that. In today's episode, we'll examine the real stories behind AI layoffs, exploring promising developments in AI, and discuss what the future holds for workers across industries. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that these topics affect real people with real families and genuine concerns. Our goal isn't to desensitize how you feel, or to be insensitive to how you feel about this. It's just to have an honest conversation about the challenges and the opportunities ahead with AI. So let's start like this. How do you guys use AI on a day-to-day? Because a lot of people, they always ask, what's your use case? How do you use AI, right? Mm-hmm. There are people who are knocking out the park right now. Mostly creatives. Well, especially creatives. Mm-hmm. I don't know about healthcare that much. We'll discuss it. But for you guys, being the financial aid and, PM in the tech industry, how do you guys use AI on a day-to-day?
Yeah, I think for myself, to be honest, it's still a learning curve, right? That's the biggest thing about AI is just discovering all the use cases. It's so new and there's so many opportunities with it. Is trying to tinker with it a little bit and find out. The most obvious is probably just trying to automate some workflows, alleviate some more just workflows that are just, a lot going on. So for myself, pretty much, I also do a lot of sort of reporting within my workflow. So I try to use it just to make the work a lot less difficult for myself. But what about yourself, Dabo?
Yeah, no, for me, as a product manager, especially in the financial services space, I use it a lot. I was one of the first few folks to get access to Gemini organizationally because, most companies, a number of companies actually banned their employees from using ChatGPT and all of that for many, many reasons. We all understand that they didn't want internal data to make itself to the web. And so there was a controlled way of rolling this out over time. And I happened to be one of the early people to get access to Gemini since we leveraged the Google suite of products within Capital One. And so I've been using it with email writing because I write a lot of emails, sending stakeholder updates. Before I would have to sit down and it would take me a number of hours to craft the email, especially with regards to who it's going to. Most of the emails I send include senior vice presidents, managing vice presidents, and so on. So I need to make sure that my emails are on point. And so it would take me a while to actually craft the emails and reread and tweak and read over again and so on. But with Gemini, oh boy, fast, fast.
Quick.
I just, okay, read to the dip, it's good, send. Also, as a PM, my role will require, say, competitive analysis, like analyzing what is Chase doing, what is Bank of America doing, Wells Fargo, especially in their new to credit segments. That's something, again, that's time consuming. I'll have to probably go to their websites, Google searches and all whatnot. But with Gemini today, that we use internally, I'm able to quickly just put a prompt in, give me so and so and so, and it will give me their detailed strategy, including things that I'll probably not have thought about in a very comprehensive format that I can then just read, look up, and then I'll start crafting my own product strategy on how we're going to tackle that at Capital One. Also, in my previous role, I was the PM for identity verification and fraud detection in the retail bank before moving to card. And so we leveraged machine learning and AI heavily in our internal models that would score check deposits to determine which checks were fraudulent or not. And so for me to get up to speed and understand what our data scientists and business analysts were doing, I needed to leverage AI a lot, to be able to understand, okay, what is a gradient boost, machine? What is so and so training method? What is this algorithm? What is that algorithm to help me to get them up to speed quickly with what the data scientists were doing, because it was very technical. We had about 100 features on the customer, the transaction, and the account that would feed through our machine learning models, and then it'll help to determine if the probability of it being fraud, and then we'll overlay that with rule-based systems to then say, okay, they should be flagged to our fraud prevention team for further review. So I think I've been in the mix for a long time now when it comes to AI and machine learning on a day-to-day basis, and also in terms of the work that I do.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find out, man. I mean, can you share your login though? Because they got that new, how to call that thing again, Joe?
Oh, VO.
VO, yeah, there you go.
By Google.
Man, just trying to create some movies out here, man.
Be the next Ryan Coogler.
You know what I'm saying?
Next Ryan Coogler, exactly.
I was put on as a PM on one of his projects at work, and it was to bring in Amazon Q for the devs, right, to help them be productive using AI. And man, I mean, I've never had such mixed reviews about some technology that I'm thinking is supposed to help them, right? So you hear a lot of people say, "Oh man, I don't want to jump on that because I feel like it's gonna make me lazy. I feel like it's gonna just make me lazy." That was the greatest concern I heard. I don't want to say excuse because their concerns are valid. So I don't know. How do you guys feel about the fact that devs think, or people in general think that this technology is here to disrupt, is here to change their day-to-day? Of course it is, but in a bad way.
Yeah, no, I can start with that. So I think they have legitimate concerns, right? They do have legitimate concerns because we're still AI is still very much in its infancy, if you ask me. The models that we see today and what we think, are doing phenomenal things, 10 years from now, we'll look at these things and be like, what were those models? Like, what were they doing? Because I think every 3 months we see the pace of change that is happening within the AI space, and it's that is outstanding. Google does something. You think they have they raise the bar. And then OpenAI does something and raises the bar. And then DeepSeek in China does something and even does it at a lower cost, and people go crazy. So the competition is tense and it's fierce. Everybody's trying to get ahead of the game. Apple is still struggling right now with its Siri and the Apple Intelligence that they announced, and we have not seen anything around that. Google had a couple of missteps, but they were able to recover. They're really doing well now. So a lot is happening, and there's an AI arms race that is going on, and the goal is to see who actually wins, because that's what they are really gunning for, because we change and define who become the leaders in the market for many years to come. So there'll be different form factors and so many other things are going to happen. Now, coming back to the concerns that people have, yes, people have legitimate worries, people have legitimate fears, because with every innovation, some jobs will be lost. If you really think about the various waves of automation that we've really had like three waves of automation in the span of time that we've been alive. The first one was the wave of automation that got rid of the muscle, and the heavy lifting of equipment, of things and all of that with machinery and factories. So now we had things that would people would normally have to do physically. You require the muscles and all of that to do. Machines came and started doing those things. The next one was a wave of automation that happened within, say, irrigation systems. Normally, I still remember those things that we had when I was in Cameroon, where you have the thing and you put water in it and you're trying to water the plants and, in the farm and all of that. Now there are machines that are pumping water out and irrigating the farms and so on and so forth. And then the third wave, which is what we are currently experiencing right now, is the automation of intelligence. So now it's going to affect knowledge workers and things that we normally thought required human judgment. With the artificial intelligence is trying to say these things can be automated by machines, and the machine will be able to then determine, what the outcomes are. And so now that it's really touching knowledge workers, yes, a lot of people have to be concerned. And even when you hear the things that are being said in interviews, Mark Zuckerberg, in a recent interview, said that by 2026, 30%, in fact, this was Satya Nadella of Microsoft. So Mark Zuckerberg said by 2026, AI is going to replace mid-level engineers. He didn't say like junior, beginner level engineers. He said mid-level engineers. A good portion of their mid-level engineers are going to be replaced by AI. That's what the CEO of Meta said. Satya Nadella of Microsoft, in the recent announcement they had at their Build Summit, said that AI is currently writing about 30% of their code base, and they expect that to increase over time. So, of course, engineers, developers, everybody will be concerned about the progression that is happening within the AI space, and is it going to come for my job? We see widespread layoffs already happening. People are being let go, and so on and so forth. So it is a concern. But then, what I wanted to add on that is that there are going to be AI is going to change the landscape in how we work. There are going to be things that AI will fully automate, and some jobs will be gotten rid of. There are going to be things that will be split between AI and humans. And then the third one is going to be the scenarios where it will be done by humans, but enhanced by AI. So those are the three things we're going to see. The first one, some jobs will be gone. Like we can't sugarcoat it in any way, shape, or form. Some jobs will be gone. If you think about when Henry Ford started working on the horseless, carriage, and getting rid of the carriage to create cars that were powered by engines, the people who worked in the business of building carriages definitely lost their jobs, because the carriages and that method of transportation had to go to give rise to cars that were powered by engines. And so, yes, there's going to be that first layer where some jobs will be completely eliminated by AI. AI will do that. In the second bucket, you're going to have jobs that will be split between AI and humans, so human in the loop. And then there'll be jobs that will be done by humans, but enhanced by AI. And so these are the three areas where I would say people need to focus on, and then now start looking at reinventing yourself, to find yourself within this two categories especially. And if you can do that, then things would be much better, and you'll have a resilient posture in the marketplace. And I'm sure we'll talk about how people can do that eventually, but I just wanted to lay that foundation as we continue to build on it. But Joseph, what do you think?
Yeah, the thing that stood out to me, which you mentioned, was the pace of change, right?
Right.
2026. There used to be certain changes that would happen, whether it's in the market or in the industry, where we talk about, well, in 2050 or in
Right.
2030, and now we're no longer talking in decades; it's year by year,
Yep.
right? And I think that's what makes people so afraid. It's things are changing, and not only are they changing, they're changing so fast. And it goes back to your point, like you were distinguishing those three layers, where people now have to really actually pay more attention to where things are going, as far as how the demand is going, and figure out how to reskill, right? I had a lecturer who once said, it's no longer the greatest skill that people will have is learning to unlearn and relearn, right? We're no longer, just like we were mentioning earlier, it's no longer a case of if AI, should I with AI? No, you have to. It's just about where you're going to fit in. Starting first with where you are in the employment sector. Are you a top tier executive? Are you a mid level manager? Are you a frontline employee? You could even argue that the frontline employees probably have to learn the quickest and the most, because we talk a lot about how do I actually automate myself out of my position?
Yep.
Because what it does is, I mean, it doesn't remove the fact that that position becomes obsolete, but it retains you because at least you've acquired that new skill set. And I often think the most when it comes to jobs is, how do you learn to become almost like a mini engineer within your job, or job bracket, because that's what's going to keep you in the job space. And the last thing I'll say is, just with regards to, the developers, and what does the future look like for them, and even for us as employees. I would imagine the first thing is fear. That's always the knee-jerk reaction, to be defensive. But again, because things are going to change inevitably, um, you know, technology impacts all sectors and everyone. So you actually have to find a way to be excited about it, right?
Yep.
What are the new things that are going to be able to do? The economists and the analysts, they'll always tell you that there are going to be jobs that will disappear, but ultimately to create new jobs. I was just reading an article earlier about Salesforce having laid off maybe 1,000 employees, but also hiring 2,000 at the same time, right? So those jobs that are no longer or becoming redundant, they're gone. But at the same time, there's new ones that are coming in. So we just all have to kind of be prepared to upskill and reskill. The real challenge is going to be how and where. How do you find opportunities, whether it's through school, whether it's through your work and through learning management systems, whether it's through YouTube, MOOCs, whatever, and maybe even also in part of tinkering and testing out AI is using it to help you learn more efficiently. I think that's one of the factors. It gives you an opportunity as an individual. I always think of it this way: as an individual, to actually be more like a CEO, or be
Right.
more like a business owner, because it's that enhanced capacity. You get to do things at greater scale. You get to do things more efficiently, whether it's your learning, or which we'll talk about later, especially for creatives, independent business owners. That's where I'm most excited, right? The Bitsy builder, right? You have a small business, it might be a few employees, but now you can create an agent that can offload all the communications, an agent that can offload, all the workflows in a certain area. And now you're operating at let's say a small business, but operating like a medium to a large size business. What that means for your, income potential, what that means for how you can reinvest in the community to help others upskill. So it's a push and pull, but we all just have to be mindful of where the opportunities are, right? Like they always say, in the midst of chaos, some people will see that, but in the midst of chaos, there are also opportunities. So,
Yep.
in all of this, I would say, this is one of the tenets that I always stand by. Perspective is everything, right? Whether you look to the left or look to the right, whether you see negative or positive, it just depends on your perspective.
Yeah. I really like what you said there, and I'd like to piggyback on that. When you talked about looking at where the opportunities are, there's this famous quote by Wayne Gretzky, the hockey legend, where he said, skate not to where the puck has been, but where it is going. We notice that a lot of people, in the way they are approaching this, they are looking at it from today's standpoint. And I think that was one of the reasons why Kodak, it's now a classical case in most business schools when they talk about innovation and what happened there. Do you know that Kodak actually invented, like they not that they necessarily invented, but they came up with one of the first digital cameras. But then they didn't see as, this is not where the opportunity is going to be, and so they shelved it. And eventually, all the innovation that happened after it eventually took them out of business because they were not looking at where the leverage was going to be, where the opportunities were going to be. They were looking at, like you said, you have to cannibalize your own self. Like on most companies, that's the fear of Google right now. Google has built this amazing search business that is generating 97% of its revenues, and they technically have to, cannibalize their search business in order for them to move ahead with AI. But then they're looking at, but with this revenue that we're getting, if we introduce AI, how would that then impact the advertising aspect of it, the revenue we're generating from advertisements and stuff? But meanwhile, OpenAI is coming like it's on their heels and really moving very fast and chipping away that market share. I was at a conference in San Francisco late last year. It was a product conference, one of the biggest in the game. And I met a couple of Google execs, and I was just asking them that, have you guys noticed, any dip in your search, the number of search queries that people are conducting on Google and versus, people using OpenAI for searches? And they were like, well, we haven't really seen a dip in searches. But I was looking at myself, for example, because I can tell you, I can't remember the last time I did a Google search. My
Facts.
default right now is I go to ChatGPT,
Facts.
and so it's like they say when the whole concept about boiling a frog because it's warm, the frog is still feeling that this is cool, it's warm, but meanwhile the fire is heating up and it's killing you, and before you know it, boom, it's out of this world. So we need to look at where the leverage is, and this is one of the things that they teach in strategy. When you're looking at strategy of an organization, you don't want to focus on where are we doing well today and let's continue to build up on that. You also want to be looking at where are the opportunities in the marketplace that even a small startup with 2 people, like Joseph, you were saying, can actually come and disrupt and take you out of business. Facebook did that to MySpace. It happens all the time. And so even as individuals, we want to continuously reinvent ourselves and, put ourselves in positions to win by looking at where the opportunities are tomorrow and not necessarily trying to hold on to what exists today.
Mhm.
I'll put in a shameless plug. This is why you need to get your kids enrolled in Bitsy Builder.
Yes,
So,
sir.
so they're not falling behind.
Yes, sir. Let's do that. Let's get them in.
I was just about to ask too about beta builders, right?
Yes.
You talk about AI.
Mhm.
I know you touched on it, in the episode of Powerhouse Central, but again, just like a shameless plug,
Yes.
talk about beta builders,
Mhm.
and how you're leveraging AI,
Mhm.
with your company, and how kids too can leverage that.
Yep.
Matter of fact, let me put it this way: for parents wanting to
Mhm.
enroll their kids to beta builders, which
Mhm.
again, what's beta builders for those who haven't watched it? Because
Yeah.
but for parents who want to enroll their kids there, how would our kids start leveraging AI from young?
Yeah. No, that's a good one. And again, for those who haven't watched the last podcast we did, you can go check it out again. Bitsy Builders, that's how it's spelled, bitsybuilders.com, and see the amazing things we're doing there. Just shameless plug as well. I'm super excited because I'll be attending the Digital Learning Week organized by UNESCO in Paris. It's going to be taking place this year from the 2nd of September to the 5th of September. There'll be, deep thinkers around AI, and the focus has really been on how AI is going to impact education. So there will be representatives from government, education, the public sector, the private sector, non-governmental agencies, independent, private owners of businesses, and everybody's coming together to really discuss on that global stage how this transformation is going to impact education at scale. Because one of the things I strongly believe is that the learning model that we have today needs to be upended. things need to change. We cannot continue to use the same systems. When I was in university, when an amphitheater of about 250 students and there's a single teacher standing down there with a microphone talking to us, and you barely even hear what's going on. And I remember very well in those settings, I'll be at the back of the class, we're talking and making noise. The professor's up there talking his ear off and we can't even hear him. And most cases, I'll just walk out of the class because I'm like, what am I doing here? So that traditional sage on stage approach where you have this all-knowing being who is trying to fill the cups of these students who don't know anything, because that's the tabula rasa approach to learning, saying that, hey, you're coming with an empty cup to be filled. But then the other model is assuming that you already know what you know. And so you're thinking about it as how do you just spark the fire that already exists in the minds of these kids, because they're already brimming with potential. So how do you spark that fire within them to cause it to continue to burn bright? And that's what we do at Bitsy Builders. We work with kids from the ages of 7 to 17, and the whole focus for us is around creative problem solving, critical thinking, and making sure that they are able to, think from first principles. If they're able to think from first principles, then they'll be able to tackle any problems in any industry that they find themselves in. So whether it's from medicine to telehealth to genetics to the computing and finance and all whatnot, as long as you can think from first principles, you'll be able to come up with solutions that would solve problems for your customers and be able to capture some of that value. And so that is the basis of what we are doing. And so we do that at the early stage for the younger groups, say those in the ages of 7 to 10, where we introduce Scratch them. Scratch is a block-based environment. They drag and drop. They build games. They're able to tell stories. I'm even looking forward to a project they're presenting to us tomorrow, where they're building this. If you think about Flappy Birds, so we asked them to build a Flappy Birds game, and we actually started with a scaffolded, template that it had to work from. And every week we built on that project. So they were adding components to it. And so in the final project they're presenting to us, they'll have to show us what they have done. So to walk us through it, we'll ask them questions. How did you get this? How did you get that? How did you go through the problem solving process and so on? So really looking forward to that tomorrow. But that's what we do. So the goal is that by them tackling these problems, getting stuck, trying to resolve these problems, it gets to build retention and enables them to maximize the learning gains. And the goal is eventually then to now introduce them to AI and show them how they can do prompting, how they can be able to understand how these models work, and have that be as a guide by the side as they go through their learning journey. And so that's something that we're very passionate about. And I'm welcoming all parents to, come try us out and see it for yourself, see the results. The results speak for itself. We've been doing this for a long time, started in Nigeria, and now we've moved to the United States as a for-profit. So come try us out, www.btbuilders.com, and we'll be happy to have your kid on board.
I'm not gonna lie, the more I hear about it, I'm like, I almost want to sign up for myself. Just creep in there. No, because
Yeah.
truthfully, the skills that you're talking about are skills that everybody needs to have.
Yeah, for real.
Across every job market, every job level. So it's good to see that the next generation is gonna have that as soon as possible. So
Yes.
kudos to you.
Thanks very much. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Right now we're seeing not seeing, but we're experiencing firsthand what it means to consume a lot but not produce a lot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Was a saying where, a ton of jobs are being outsourced, and Trump in himself is trying to pull some of them back. But the question here is, how do we get people, some folks from the computers to actually do some of these factory jobs that they want to bring back, for example? You know what I mean? You see things like, Apple that, he's talking about Apple make phones in, the States, and they're saying, hey, that would increase the price. My thing with Apple in itself is, bruh, stop fooling us, man. Or maybe we should stop falling for, that, that
Exactly.
blah, you know what I mean? So, because how can you advertise that, this, the iOS 16 is coming with Apple Intelligence.
Apple Intelligence, I'm telling you.
We don't have that. And then now they order you to remove, that from your website, stuff like that. I guess one goal, my question is, we see ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, all these different ones, they are competing.
Mm-hmm.
Who should this be a matter of who should be at the top, or should this be a matter of safety, regulations, things like that? What do you guys think?
Yeah, that's a very good one. Joseph, did you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think when I think about it, I just think about going back to I think it was the earlier stages of when COVID happened, and there was a lot of talk about education, and because of reformatting it, I think more about democratization than I do who's going to be at the top.
Right.
So I think it's good that there's a healthy amount of competition. Everybody's trying to perfect a certain model for a certain use case, but at the same time, there are options, right? I've used Claude, I've used Copilot, used ChatGPT, Gemini. They all have something that they're particularly good at, and I think if it were up to one company, that's when I would be worried. That sort of gives me that what is it, Terminator vibes. Skynet is going to come because that's too much consolidation, right? Especially when you talk about ethics, right? That's a big concern. Security. One company having access to all that data, are the models going to be biased or not? How do you ensure that the engineers that are coding them don't make it biased? Then when you think about like a Google offloading 30% of their, was it Google or yeah, Google, 30% of their coding, it still depends on who coded that for the 30% not to be biased.
Yep.
Right. So I'm fine with the fact that there's a lot of companies. I wouldn't want to see one at the top. I know, obviously, in the grand scheme of things, let's say global politics, of course, America would say, as long as the company that is leading is American, we're fine, no matter which one it is. But that's a whole different story. Yeah. And I think also, again, even when you think about China and what they're doing with DeepSeek, and it's crazy to think they're doing the same with less. Right. Because imagine how much more they would do if they had the same technology. When you look at that, just their level of creativity and insight. Again, if there were not people trying to compete, we wouldn't be able to see all these options. And truthfully, we wouldn't even see the innovations. Let's go back to Apple. What happened to Siri? Siri hasn't been good since the beginning, right? Yep. I made a joke the other day. I recorded a snippet from the TV. It was during a basketball game. And they said, oh, just ask Siri about the scores. They ask it, you see the little prompt. You didn't even see the answer in the commercial. I said, that's proof to you this thing doesn't work. Yes. Right? Or you ask the new Siri now and, you say, okay, tell me this and this temperature in this country. It says, do you want me to ask ChatGPT? So Siri yes. doesn't have the answers. Right?
Exactly.
That's true.
So that is so true.
We do need competition, right? Yes. Because if one person could do it, it might not be good enough. Mm-hmm. And especially for all the innovation and all the opportunities, you think about companies like yourself with Bitsy Builder and mm-hmm. what you can do for students who need access to that information. You need high quality AI tools, right? And the more options you have, the better you can facilitate that. So I definitely think the competition is good. I wouldn't want to consolidate it. Hopefully it doesn't happen. Even I did see an article where there's talks about Apple possibly partnering with Google to infuse Gemini so that they can sort of offset the delays, things like that. You understand those are corporate decisions, but I still think the AI landscape is where it should be. And knowing open AI, it's only going to grow, mm-hmm. right? As they continue to make investments, especially looking towards Africa, mm-hmm. startups that are coming up on the continent, those that want to be AI first. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But what do you think about that, Tabot?
To add to that, he just made a very interesting point there. Actually, addressing that, address it from an African standpoint, right? Mm-hmm. Like AI in Africa, right? Mm-hmm. What's your take? Actually, answering that question.
Yeah, AI in Africa?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. No, I'll touch on that, but I just want to say I really agree with everything that Joseph has said, that I also believe in the democratization of, and the competition that is happening across the landscape. It would be dangerous if we only had open AI pushing the frontiers of AI, or if we had, say, a Google and having all that power consolidated with one company. But now, as we can see, it's making Apple now to take notice. Gemini, when they rolled it out, you remember there was that issue they had where you do a prompt for, I think, was it Abraham Lincoln, and it showed up as a black man. So many things, but the course corrected, and we're able to recover from that. We have Claude, XAI, Elon Musk company, also working on Grok and a number of other models. I feel like what is going to happen there is that, and even Facebook and the Llama model, they are going through this using the open sourcing approach. So there's closed source, there's open source. OpenAI initially said they were going to open up, their models, and I think that's the reason why Elon Musk is going back and forth with Sam Altman, because he was an initial investor in OpenAI, and so it's good to see all of this playing out, because what then happens to us, the consumers, is the cost is going to drop. The cost will reduce to the point where I think we'll probably be close to zero, because everybody is competing. There's the open source. If people want to keep it closed, we have options. So we have options to make use of it. The base model will become a commodity, and then it will be now what applications you get to build on it. That's where I think a lot of the value is going to be captured in terms of the applications and the use cases. But in terms of the base foundational model, the cost of developing that is going to approach zero for us, the consumers. Yes, it's going to require a lot of power, energy for the companies that are doing this. But then for us, we'll be able to access that via an API as easily as possible, and be able to then build, interesting things on it. So wholeheartedly agree with you on all that is happening. And even like you said with DeepSeek also shone the light on a number of things for the American companies, because when they heard, everybody was quaking in their boots when DeepSeek came out. Like, he put them on red alert that, hey, you guys have been sleeping on this thing. You have to wake up. So it's good that we're also having that competition happening globally. But like Joseph said, of course, there's some global politics at play as well. NVIDIA cannot sell certain chips to China because US wants to make sure that we maintain the dominant lead in this race. And so all of that will continue to happen at the global level. It's where both our pay grades will be watching. Now, let's go back to Africa. Now, for Africa, I saw a post by this guy on LinkedIn. What's his name again? He's the founder of hotels.ng. I've forgotten his name now. It was a very interesting post where he talks about what AI is going to mean for Africa. And yes, Mark Essien is his name. Mark Essien, yes, his name. He's the founder of hotels.ng. Pretty smart guy. I've followed him for a very long time. And he was saying that right now, if you look at the way things are, AI is not thinking for itself. It's like I mentioned, it's garbage in, garbage out. You have to prompt it well for it to give you the right responses. It hallucinates. There are times when you ask it certain things, it will tell you an answer, then you push it a little bit, some sort of like to the point of bullying it. I don't know who said this, that it looks like you need to bully this model sometimes, like, because when you bully it, it gives you a better response. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, this is and that, and then it now flips it around. And so he was saying that there will definitely be many use cases for us in Africa as a continent, especially. And one of the areas that it will have profound impact is in the education space. And he had this internship called something LNG or something internship, or hotels.ng internship, where it was an open internship where they just ran this program for anybody who wanted to, become an engineer, a developer. They would run this thing every year. So they would take people in. It was free, and they were training software engineers and churning out software engineers by that. He said they had to stop the program because when he looked at what is happening right now, that is not the direction in which you want to be going. And again, it's talking about going to where the puck is, not where it has been. If you're thinking about working, and he said the whole model about front end, back end is no longer going to exist at some point. Yeah, because we're used to the MVC model view controller framework, and we developed applications. We thought about it as the front end and the back end and the middleware. All of that, as we know it, is going to change. I don't know if you guys heard about the new partnership that OpenAI established with Johnny Ivey, the former designer at Apple. And Johnny Ive's company is working on new devices and different form factors that are going to exist. The way we interact with our phones today, where we have the touching a screen, all of that stuff as well is going to change.
Mhm.
The way we interact with our computers, all of that stuff is going to change. We've gotten sneak peeks into it through science fiction. When you think about the movies like Iron Man, Tony Stark, you see him pulling things and dropping things. Think about Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. And I always believe that everything you see in these movies, these are things that are being thought about
Yeah.
for the future.
Yep. Yep.
So all of those things, there'll be different form factors that would exist. And I feel like OpenAI has a big opportunity right now to come up with that new hardware. What is that new form factor going to be like through this
There are,
partnership with Johnny
there are,
Ive?
sorry, Christian, but
No,
there
go
are
ahead.
actually technologies right now.
Right.
Meta has the Ray Bans.
Mhm.
That has
Right.
the Meta Quest.
Right.
Or has the
Right.
Vision Pro. Right.
Right.
All of them have the AI integrated in them. Like literally that Tom Cruise movie,
Yeah.
the time where it was dragging things. It's the same
Yeah.
thing. Vision Pro,
Yeah.
things like that. But sorry, just wanted to say that. But continue.
Yeah. No, and so the point I was trying to make from that is, so we need to rethink everything. The role of the software engineer, what is it going to be like? We have so many frameworks, React, Java, and all of these things that exist today. We may get to a future where we are basically using voice to talk to to whatever that form factor is going to be, and it would write the code, and we're debugging in real time with it. So today we have Copilot. It sits as a pair programmer, but then when we now have this interactive you know form in which we're communicating with this form factor, and it's responding in real time, and we're debugging in real time, it becomes a peer to us, in that case, a peer programmer. And so he said they had to stop the internship, and now they're going back into the lab to start rethinking what is the future going to look like, even for the space of coding, for example. And so that's now thinking about where the opportunities are, where the leverage is, as opposed to looking at today and looking at the traditional MVC front end, back end, middleware architectures that we have. How are things going to change in the future so that we can start now bringing our kids up in that light and introducing them to what these new forms are going to be. So I think that's an area where I see huge opportunities, especially for Africa, given that we're going to have the youngest population in the world by 2035. So we want to make sure that they start getting that early on. Yeah.
When you mentioned that interactive AI, the Tony Stark's example was so good because it makes me think of Jarvis.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
It's one to one where you just ask it this, it does that, infers.
Yep.
The other thing I would say is too, you're right about Africa because and mentioning what the founder Mark Essien was saying, because this started even before COVID. Once the sort of IT was a thing, globally, and technology businesses booming across the world. And I always kept thinking, Africa is going to be in a point where we don't have time to go back, right? To start from step one as far as industrial revolutions.
Right.
We have to start at this point and move forward, and actually start to leap. And it seems challenging, but even when you start to think about AI and just all this going on with science, you actually believe that even if we had to build certain things, let's say infrastructure that still needs to be put in place, we have an opportunity to do it in the most efficient way, maybe cost effective, using the most useful materials, things that are readily available, integrating technology into that, or testing those certain materials. And going back to the education point, again, we know Africans are smart. I always like to say that we have the intelligence, we just lack the opportunities, right? Because of a lot of those industries that were underdeveloped in Africa. And you just imagine what the youth. I remember there was an individual, I can't remember which country it was from. It was a young boy. He actually got spotted by an African American who was working at MIT because of some robotics that he built. He managed to build I think it was like a radio using just some component parts.
Yes.
So you imagine people like that who now have access to these tools and what they can truly create. right?
Mhm.
Especially when you start to integrate that AI and use it as a tool where it's giving you feedback and you're testing things and you're modifying things. So I think the future is still bright.
Yeah.
Going back to that point, Africa's, I don't want to say overlooked. I don't think people overlook Africa. They just don't talk about it, but they're
Mhm.
keeping their eyes on it
Oh yeah.
when it comes to the youth,
Mhm.
right? And how much potential there is, how much growth will happen once the youth starts to really maximize their full potential, getting access to education, getting into these job spaces and things like that. So it's
Yeah.
going to be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are great points you guys bring up, and I don't want to negate the fact that, well, not negate, but I want to add that. How can I put this? Well, I believe that we can make this happen.
Yes.
Why? Because if we can block the internet access, if we can block people from accessing the internet, we have
Mhm.
all the technology we need to create these things.
Yes.
The governments just need to give the people, open the doors for the people to innovate. The
Mhm.
fear of people innovating and then overtaking the government is what's keeping us behind. You know what
Mhm.
I mean? Because you want to over dominate the people to the point where it's like, you know that this will be beneficial for society, but you just want to hold the people back just because you just want to keep that dominance on people. And I hope AI comes and really disrupts that in
Yep.
any and every way shape possible. Because one, it would put more money into the young
Yeah.
pockets. They
Mhm.
don't necessarily have to wait for the older folks to retire, you know what I mean, and create room for them to, bro. How many people in Africa are PhD holders yet not even a common job as a secretary? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like truck pushers. Imagine what this will open up.
Mhm.
Deep seek being cheaper, in the African space. But I did want to ask Joe. We were just talking about what was the thing? Google's Notebook LM.
Mm-hmm.
You've probably used this tool as well, Tabot, and
Yes.
mentioned
Yes.
something about that interactive aspect of it, right? Like we see a lot of that right now. Why are people so scared to, Grok, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude? They've all integrated that one-on-one interaction with AI, right?
Mhm.
I hear some people say, "Oh man, I get my therapy from ChatGPT." Wow, but doable if you do it the right way. I mean, if you
Yeah.
learn prompting,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
engineering, you could prompt properly to get what you need, right? Why are people so scared of interacting with it, even though they are making it way accessible than usual?
I think I'll start off on that. I think it's just the newness of it, right? I think of a simple example when you go to the grocery store and you have the choice between going to the teller or going to or the cashier, I should say, or going to the self-service line, right? You don't want to be that person who looks like they don't know what they're doing. You're holding up the line, right? And even with these AI tools, using them can actually expose your lack of knowledge, right? And that's something people might find difficult to deal with, right? Because it truly shows you that time is moving, right? And that you have to start relearning new things. I think of my parents. Oh, I got the latest iPhone. Okay, but do you know how to use XYZ feature? No, show me, right? So some people would want to use those tools, but they're not truly prepared to do the learning, right? Sometimes people don't want to have to relearn new things, right? You think of people who are at a senior level. You used the great example about the politicians. They've been there for so long. The last thing you want is someone to tell you, well, you don't know enough, right?
Mm.
Or you have to learn more, or that someone could replace you, right? So I think for people, it's just having the difficulty of realizing you have to tackle that reality, right? And come to terms with it. I think about myself and my job. I do some sort of data analysis from time to time, and I'll use a Copilot and try to fix some formulas and things like that. But in the back of my mind, truly, I know it's just a matter of time where there's an AI tool that can basically replace a data analyst in the same way that it's replacing coding, right? All the information is there as long as it can source it. You prompt a question, that job role is kind of obsolete. So that pending doom, so to speak, of fear that once you start to integrate with AI, you're also starting to hold up a mirror to yourself and see what the future holds, right? And that you might not be a part of that future unless you truly start to get a grasp with it. So I think it's a fear base. We talked about it at the top of the podcast about not wanting to be too jarring, but also speaking about the realities of these things, that it's scary because there's so much potential and it's right around the corner. Talbot, you mentioned it,
Yeah.
2026.
Yep.
It's already June, you blink and it's
Yeah.
2026. And next thing you know, people are forced to change. It's very reminiscent of COVID, just minus the ailment part of it, right? The way companies are shifting, they're retooling, reinvesting. We spoke earlier about the Salesforce and the layoffs. We know how the tech space is. Layoffs happen whether we like it or not, just because of that, wanting to not only get ahead of the technology, but to make profits. And profits are not a bad thing because that allows companies to ultimately reinvest to scale up. We spoke about Facebook and the opportunities that it'll create once they can develop that to other countries. The last thing I'll say, just to that point, I thought about it when you were talking about Facebook, and it made me think of Facebook and its integration with not only their AI model Llama, but WhatsApp, and how Africans typically have access to that. I remember in South Africa, there was a bank, ABSA Bank, that actually created a WhatsApp account to allow banking to happen through WhatsApp.
Yeah.
So now you can imagine young people, and again, that democratization. You have a phone, you have access to WhatsApp, the data cost is relatively low. Now you're using an AI tool within a WhatsApp and you're creating a whole business, right? So not just interacting with business, but you now too have the ability to create a business. So
Yeah.
I think there's still more upside. It's just you have to be willing to see where it's going to go and how you can get there.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree with you, Joseph, and what you said, that it's really fear-based. Fear is what is holding a lot of people back from taking advantage of these amazing opportunities that have presented themselves for us through AI. And the second one is inertia. Like Newton's first law of motion, also known as the law of inertia, states that an object at rest will remain at rest, and an object in motion will remain at motion at constant speed in a straight line unless acted upon by an external force. And so that's exactly what would happen to some people. They will need to be acted upon by an external force and may come in the form of losing a job or being on the brink of losing a job. Then they realize that, hey, this is the wake up call. I've been sleeping and I need to wake up and get on the train. you know there's this book did in that we read in one of my courses way back in when I was doing my master's. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the innovator's dilemma, where it talks about this curve of crossing the chasm. You have a very in the when you look at that bell curve, right down here in the first group of people, it's a very small group. They are the innovators. They are the ones who, when a new innovation comes up, they want to try, they want to tinker with it, they want to do things with it. Those are the people who would get early access to ChatGPT, the new models that come out. They want to be on that waiting list. They want to be the beta testers, even to test and provide feedback and so on. It's a very small group of them. And then you move to the next group called the early adopters, right? The early adopters, they are the ones who, okay, now that it has made its way out of the innovators who have done some things with Cloud, Grok, and all of that, they now start getting wind of it and they want to try it out themselves. And then now most of the people fall in what they call the early majority. Now, these are the people who have seen the impacts of and the benefits that have come out of it. They start getting on board. And then now, towards the tail end of that curve, we have what we call the late majority. So these are the people who maybe 3 years, 5 years down the line, they're now trying to catch on. And then you have the last group they call the laggards. The laggards are the people who fekwa. They say, yeah,
Late
they're
to the
like,
party.
late to the party. This is like when everybody has moved and gone. And then they now come and say, okay, let me check this thing out. Those are the people who actually end up getting affected the most. And so that's just a natural progression when it comes to technology adoption. So it's fear and it's that inertia to, get going, and everything that is described in that curve, where you have people who are going to start using it very early, people who are going to, get wind of it and start seeing the benefits and they want to try it. And then there's that group, which is the majority, and then the late majority, and then you have the laggard. So it always falls in that bell curve.
Do you guys think that the universal base income module will be a thing, with like in 4 to 5 years down the road, or 5 to 10 years down the road? Do you think universal base income will be a topic of conversation, being that a lot of people think AI will replace their jobs?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a topic of conversation, and I know it has come up a number of times in the campaign trails. A number of the previous elections we have had, where there have been candidates who have pushed for it. I feel like it's going to become a topic of conversation, because when you think about, say, the older generation, a number of them are not going to be trying to get on ChatGPT, and using AI models and all of that. Like, I can't remember my dad. Like, I don't know how these people did it. Like, when I think about it now, I'm like, did he ever receive an email? Did he check his emails? He has an email, but most of his
Mhm.
conversations happen on the phone, and WhatsApp. Um, I really don't know. Like, I don't know if he has ever like sat down to send an email. My mom has an email. I don't know if she actually ever used it, and so I think there is a generation, a group that will be like, hey, this thing, yeah, you guys are children. You can carry on. We've done our part, and we're moving on. And so some of those people in that generation are still working in companies that require some manual entry of tasks to be done, where things are not fully automated, things are not fully digitized, and that's how they're able to continue working. And if you notice, people are living longer. People are living longer. People are working longer. People are in their 60s, 70s, still working. There are a number of people who have retired and unretired because, again, they realized, we're talking about this thing with my uncle, because, like, uncle, you look so good at 74. Why is that? And he was like, because his mind is still, so he has retired officially. He lives in Nigeria, retired officially from, the workforce, but then he has his own law firm. And so he takes, contracts here and there. He helps property owners, to manage their properties for them. So he's doing things that are keeping him busy. And he said something to me that, research has also proven this, that take two people. One retires, all they do is they wake up every day, they watch the news, they go back to sleep, watch the news, go back to sleep. They're not really engaged in anything that is really engaging their brain and doing, things around. The person who is still very active, though they retired at the same time, around the same age group, the person who is active will end up living longer than the person who was just waking up and watching news and going back to sleep and not doing much. It's proven. And so a lot of people are retiring and on retiring and coming back again. They want to still keep themselves engaged, because if you stay and you're not doing anything, before you know it, you're checked out and you're leaving, you get to die early. Diseases and all those things come on board. So as people are living longer, people are working longer, what is going to happen to that generation? That it's gonna take them, a lot more. It's gonna be a heavy lift for them to really get on board with all the advancements and keeping up to date with what's happening in the AI space. Even for us who are in a younger generation, it's not easy. Like, it is not easy to actually,
Yeah.
keep moving. Like right now, we just acquired Discover Card. So Capital One has merged with Discover to become the largest credit card issuer in the United States. We have teams and capabilities that we're acquiring from those teams. Guess what is going to happen? There's going to be a lot more competition in terms of performance reviews and everything.
Mhm.
The larger company, some people will now have to be pipped eventually. And so we now have to get ahead. So I remember when I graduated from school, I thought that when you start working, you would read less. I'm reading even more than when I was in university. I'm reading even more than when I
Yeah.
was doing my PhD. I'm studying even more than when I was doing my MBA. Like, I'm constantly reading and listening to podcasts on my drives to wherever I'm going to work, wherever it is, I'm making sure that there's a podcast on AI or something that is playing in the car, because I have to constantly be learning, like, and there's a generation that it will be a lot more difficult for them to be able to keep pace with the changes that are happening within these landscapes. And so I feel like that is where the concepts of things like universal basic income will need to come into play so that we can make sure that those people are well taken care of as well. Because as we all know, Social Security is drying up. There's a prediction already that by a certain year, all those funds will be gone. So what is going to happen for those who are dependent on Social Security and all of that, you know? So I feel like that's going to definitely be a conversation, and it needs to be because there are other countries that have applied things like this. Yes, of course, there's going to be a further debate and further things to be explored between capitalism and socialism and, you know, all the other systems. But I believe that there are things that can be borrowed from the different ways in which things are done to make for a situation where all the wealth is not going to the 1%, like Elon Musk making $200 billion, you know, like what? And meanwhile, there are people who are barely struggling to get by. Probably 60% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck. You know, of course, I'm not knocking him, but I'm just saying that things need to change because if we are not careful, the wealth would AI may end up trickling the world into just a few hands, and it just still makes its way back to the top 1%, and the rest of the world is struggling. So these are conversations that would need to be had for sure.
Yeah, I'll just wrap up on that point and say, I've it definitely crossed my mind. I think it was probably what Trump's first presidential run. There was a candidate, Andrew Yang, who talked about universal basic
Yes,
income.
I was trying to remember his name. That's the guy.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's a very interesting concept because the realities and probably AI is proving it even more of the displacement of jobs, the high cost of living. You know, what are people going to have as far as options? You know, if you're already unemployed or let's say underemployed, you know, moving is not necessarily an option. People always say, oh, well, I'll just move to another country. The dollar is more favorable. I'll survive. It's not that easy.
It's not that
right?
easy.
In theory, it is, but it's not. It's in reality, it's not.
Yep.
So I think, and you know, just going back to your point about also the income share, right? You would hope that with AI, a lot more people can get onto the bandwagon of finding ways to generate income. You know, I hate to think that the idea of the side hustle is for everybody now, because you know, for some people it might be feasible. For some, they might have to have a side hustle that becomes their proverbial job. You know, those that are, you know, getting into the tech space, let's say tech adjacent, they're acquiring those skills just to stay on pace with what's going on. They might not necessarily ascend to the top. And, you know, just like you said, even for those of us already working, already dealing with tech, even that is difficult to keep up with. So you'd hope that at least some people can start to get onto the bandwagon, at least start to create opportunities for themselves. I think about, you know, when you mentioned how there's going to be new ways for that income distribution to happen. I think about, you know, how do we look at ways where there's more, I'm thinking about African community savings schemes. You know, how are we integrating with entrepreneurs and saving schemes, and how are we sort of pooling resources together, whether it's generating money? How are we looking at, you know, there's a gap in Africa, oftentimes when it comes to insurance. How are we looking at ways to leverage those pools of income to create new means of succession, right? When it comes to, I'm trying to think of the term here. It just slipped my mind. But anyways, creating that succession where people can have access to that capital as well in a sort of safety net kind of way, even though it's going to be, you know, split into different areas and things like that. Even when we talk about the governments, how do we become, and I hate to say less reliant, but look at different ways to not be as reliant, right? Especially given all the opportunities. America is probably the greatest case in the world, the land of opportunity, right? There's so much that we can do. How do we plug people into those opportunities so they're not left behind? It might not be in a formal workplace anymore. And again, that's going back to Africa and thinking about how they often say that a lot of the informal sectors in Africa, just because they don't have eyes on it, or they're not directly tied to it, they can't put a figure on it. But oftentimes the scale of the money that's changing hands is comparable to big businesses.
Yep.
You think about the US, as people are offloading from the workspace, whether it's the gig economy or those that are unemployed, how do they start to informalize or become an informal sector where they can still thrive? Maybe universal basic income factors into that. How do we use it as a tool to invest in those people rather than just feed them money? They sit on the couch and
Right,
degrade
right,
over time and
right.
then require more care, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're getting sick, if you need more assistance, you know, then you almost create more of a use case for people wanting to create those androids that we don't want to see, you know, going back to the movies and AI robots. So it's, you kind of have to pick your poison, and ultimately see, again, it goes back to how do you position yourself for the realities that are coming, not only today, tomorrow, but today.
Mm. Yeah.
Just right back to you again, Joe. How you mentioned something about government.
Hmm.
Is it the government? What role does the government play here, right? And let's talk about regulations.
Hmm.
Should they keep regulating? Should they leave it to the private businesses to implement what governance look like?
Man, and it's such a difficult one because there isn't a perfect answer. You have to kind of look at different use cases across the world where there's too much government regulation, how that maybe stifles innovation, stifles creativity, where there's not enough regulation and, you know, there's a consolidation of power and maybe a private company. I think the government already does a good job, at least in this regard, of keeping a pulse on the finger on the pulse. You think about the SEC, for example, Securities Exchange Commission. I still think regulation is necessary, especially when it comes to data privacy, when it comes to ethics. You might think that maybe the ethics might be more so the companies, but it's difficult to leave that in those hands. You think of that issue that Google had. I believe they fired one of their executives who was in charge of ethics at one point. It was a lady, I forgot her name.
Oh, yeah. I remember
So
that.
you don't want to run into those examples because it's a prime example of what can happen. So I think government does have to still play the watchdog role,
Yep.
just to keep companies in check, because you don't want one, they primarily look at over consolidation. You don't want to see these large conglomerates just cannibalizing the market. Goes back to what we mentioned earlier about one company being the sort of overseer of all the information, because truly then what happens is the company then probably has more power than the government, and that becomes a real imbalance. So there still need to be a watchdog, primarily when it comes to data privacy. I think that's the most important, and just to sort of keep things in balance.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. That regulation is needed, but then it's kind of like a double-edged sword. So how that sword is wielded is going to be very important because, for example, this happened very recently. There is this rule called that was established by the former CFPB, the Consumer Financial Bureau Protection, which is the agency that oversees, the financial agencies, the financial services, and the banking sector and everything. There was a rule that they were coming up with called 1033. So 1033 was going to enable consumers to have the power back to decide how their data is used. And so it was going to enable open sharing of data across banks and fintechs, so that fintechs can also have opportunities to compete with the big banks. Since via APIs, they'll be able to access the, not that they'll be sharing, so the banks will be sharing everything, but say sharing things like transaction data, and things that can be shared across banks to enable better fraud modeling and detection, like what they are doing with Zelle, because Zelle was established by a consortium of banks, Capital One being one of the owners. And so the big banks came together, established Zelle, but then the small players are not included in that mix. So open banking was going to say that you guys have to share this data, even with the small fintechs that are coming up, so that they can be able to have a competitive edge in the marketplace. Now, Trump's own CFPB has come in and they've overruled 1033. They said it's baseless, it's not needed, and they scratched it, basically. There are other aspects, for example, where a cap was put on how much banks could charge customers in terms of overdraft fees. by the former CFPB. The new CFPB has come in, and they said, away with that. Let's leave it to the forces of the market forces to be at play. So things like that, we believe that regulation needs to be in place to control what is happening in the marketplace, because you cannot have banks just charging customers, like exorbitant fees every now and then, and keep putting people in more precarious positions than they should be, and so we need regulation to be able to control things like that. But at the same time, like Joseph said, we don't want to now over-regulate to the point where we are now stifling innovation. Again, when we talk about the race that is going on between the global powers, Russia, China, the United States, and so on, China is trying to win. The US is trying to win. Russia is trying to win. Depending on how people are playing, if you have an entity within your country that is now putting too much regulation, then you risk the other people now leapfrogging you and then becoming the dominant players in the game. And now you have to play catch up. And so we also have to make sure that we are enabling our best minds to be thinking about these intractable problems and proffering solutions that can then help us stay ahead of the game and make sure that, we continue to innovate at breakneck speeds. So I feel like there's going to, whoever happens to be leading these agencies that are responsible for regulation and ethics, it's a very tough job. And like the CEO of Capital One will say, it's a very tough way to make a living. So I wish them well, but they would have to wield that sword very well so that they maintain that balance between not overly regulating and stifling innovation, at the same time not letting things just run rampant and then people are losing their money, like in the case of the number of Bitcoin and crypto scams that have happened over time. There's some Bankman-Frieds, and all that stuff. So yeah, we want to be able to wield it very well.
And I'll just say this last point, the irony of potentially leaving it to the corporations. If you now impose tariffs, you're putting them between a rock and a hard place where they then have to potentially raise their prices.
Yep. And
so
the consumers get to feel the heat.
So you have to be mindful of, are we doing what's best for the people? Are we,
Yes.
corporations only? So, competition is still a factor. There's a lot of balancing act that goes along.
Yeah.
As we wrap up here, or as we coming to, conclusion, which is it's been a really dope conversation.
For sure.
And man, we could keep going.
I know we could keep going, yeah, but
easily.
Easily.
Attention. Let's close and then we can, come back and, pick up from where we left off, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But for those who are currently listening right now and they're like, man, this all sounds great and all, but I don't know where to start. I'm better yet, we're in graduation season, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of students just graduated. They go into the workforce. Some of them will face challenges that they never faced in their lives.
Never took any AI courses in college.
Yes.
Resumes, they'll be competing with people who, are using AI to build better resumes, for those who are not using that, right? What advice do you guys have for people entering the workforce today, versus, those in their mid-level careers, especially, with the idea of AI out there?
I'll start just by saying, give it a try, right? It's better to get familiar with it than to not, all right? There's no point in trying to avoid it. And I was just thinking about this the other day, actually. It's just, they say in investing, the best time to invest was yesterday and the second best time was today. Mm-hmm. So for the youth, when all you have ahead of you is time, use it, right? So definitely familiarize yourself with it. We have access to all these other learning tools. Again, ask your company if they have a learning management system. Use that. Companies want to see their staff learning, right? Especially if they can sort of reduce some of the costs. It helps them retain people. It helps them to stay ahead because, human capital is very important. And I think for students especially, or graduates, young professionals, you have to want to have skin in the game. Right. I think about, my career, and when I look at it, and it's like, you shouldn't be satisfied, right? Complacency will make you, will cause you to stagnate, right? It's okay to be content but never satisfied. That's what I like to say. So don't be satisfied with, I got my degree, I'm in the workforce, I'll just kind of write it out, right? Now is the time to upskill. Talbot, you mentioned it earlier about you're learning more now than when you were in
Yeah.
school, right?
Yeah.
So maybe apply that approach to say, I'm going to go into this like this is a new learning space, right? I'm now learning within the professional domain. I'm learning about technology. And again, we might not have touched on it in full with, for example, healthcare, education. There is no industry or job role that you will have that won't be impacted by AI or by technology. So by all means, get used to it. Whether it's a cashier that's going to be, having to deal with AI or it's an executive, it doesn't matter. So don't shy away from it. Learn it and don't feel like you have to master it. I don't think any of us feel like we ever could, but at least try to be proficient at it.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to build on what Joseph, just talked about, since, like I mentioned, my background has been in education. The PhD I was working on before I dropped out was in learning. So e-learning, mobile learning, micro learning. So I want to break it down for our listeners to show them how to actually do this. I strongly believe in micro learning. So micro learning is basically learning in bits. You can tell yourself that, and this has happened to me many times, where I'm like, I want to go all in on this thing. And so I'm thinking about blocking 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours on my calendar to, just go in on it. But then I realized that when I do that, to maintain that momentum is hard. Because yes, today you may block out the 2 hours or 3 hours, you go in on it, you read, you study, you do all of that. But then the next time, it becomes even more difficult for you to schedule that block of time on your calendar. And as you get more busy and everything, it gets even harder. So what I do is micro learning. If I'm driving in the car, I'm listening to a podcast, and I listen to long form podcasts now. 1 hour, 1 hour, 30 minutes. If you have a drive that is taking you, say, 45 minutes to go and 45 minutes to come back, that is 1 hour, 30 minutes of amazing learning time. Don't waste it. Yes, you could be listening to music and so on, but if you just take that time, and there's so many good sources of knowledge now. I listen to the All In podcast by this amazing guys, Chamath Palihapitiya, David Freeberg, amazing guys. I listen to that podcast every now and then because by you just listening to people talking about these things, you're soaking up knowledge. So that drive of 45 minutes or 1 hour, 30 minutes or whatever that drive is, or you may be in the train, you're commuting in the metro from Baltimore to DC or wherever it is, use that as a learning platform. Let the world be your school, right? Learning doesn't necessarily happen within the four walls of the classroom. Yes, you've graduated from university, you have left the world of school and you've come into the what's it called? There's the world of school and there's the school of life or something like that. Life of school and school of life. Yes. So you have left the life of school, which was in the classroom, attending, courses and everything. Now you have come to the school of life, and the game is played differently here. The parameters and the way things move is completely different. So you have to learn how to adapt in this system, and so you have to let the world be your playing field for you. And so it would happen in the form of listening to podcasts. Reduce your time spent on social media. Like I sit with young people, I see that. I sitting at Thanksgiving, this thing together with my wife and her family, and there were a number of young people sitting around the table, and I noticed that all of them had their heads down on their phones. They were not talking to each other. So I came and sat beside them, and I was like, "Hey, let's play a game. Everybody, let's pick up your phones and let's look at your screen time, on their phones and see how much time you spend. Let's see your most used apps." It didn't go past TikTok and Instagram. 12 hours, 18 hours a day, TikTok and Instagram. And I was like, you see, this is the problem we have right now. So that amount of time that you're spending watching TikTok videos and Instagram videos, you could deploy some of that into learning something new. So you may say, oh, I don't have the time. No, you do have the time. You're just not using it wisely. And so I would say reduce the time you spend on social media and deploy some of that time into learning something new, because it's going to benefit you in ways that you can't even imagine. Don't be a slave to the algorithms. Don't be a slave to doom scrolling and constantly watching the next entertainment and the next entertainment and getting that high of social media. Deploy that some of that time into spending time to think, to reflect on the things you're learning, and deploying that time to learn new things. And then finally, I would say, like Joseph was saying, just tinker with things, tinker. Spend time playing around with these AI tools and see what gives. And the moment you start playing with one and you're seeing the benefits of it, you realize that you start, you know, doing more of it. So have your own personal lab. Like see it as your own lab and opportunity to experiment with things. Just continue to experiment and have that learning agility to stay agile in terms of how you learn and be always willing to learn, and learning and growth, it's a lifetime quest. It's never going to end. It's like they say, multiplayer games or those games that you keep multi worlds and you're conquering and moving on and moving on. See learning as that. You have many more worlds to conquer. And like I said, I never stop learning. I'm always like deepening my knowledge base. And if you do that, you realize that you always be on top of your game and you become future proof. You future proof your career that way if you stay on that learning train. So those are the few thoughts I wanted to share around that.
AI has even incentivized that. You can use a notebook LM, put all the
Yeah,
resources in there, listen to a podcast, and learn along the
exactly.
way. So
Exactly.
it's all the resources are there.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yep.
exactly.
Let me ask a very wild question.
Hmm.
You know how in dating they say nice guys don't last, right? They said nice guys don't last. Um, most of the AI CEOs, when you read, you don't find that they're good people, do you?
That is true. Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
So with that ideology, I mean, I guess when I'm thinking about the good, the bad, the ugly of it, right?
Hmm.
Why should I sit here and be trying to beat my brain about I mean, sorry, the negatives in it when I
Hmm.
know the inventors of it and how they feel about it? You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Why
Hmm.
should I
Hmm.
limit myself and say, oh, I'm not going to use it because somewhere, across the border, across the world, somebody's suffering while I'm enjoying this technology. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
I guess
Hmm.
why should I have that feeling to it? No,
Hmm.
why can't I just use it on a day to day without that feeling attached to it? Also knowing fully well the inventors of it.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, and
Yeah.
I'm thinking about it. This probably still too in the realm of economics or business rather than social, but I'm thinking about it from the standpoint of ESG and all these data centers that are going to need to be built, right, to power all these AI models. And it's again, they've talked about it in probably other spheres. You think about like clothing and are the ethical practices of the people that were producing the materials, but AI is going to fall into that same realm, and it's going to be a conversation. It should be happening now, and it
Hmm.
probably is, but in drips and drabs. But just wondering the ethics behind it, the impact that it's going to have on other people, right? Yes, you're using all these chat GPT or models, you're creating business for yourself and income, but somewhere on the other side of the world, they're wiping out entire landscapes just to build an data center
Data
of
centers,
who knows
right?
how many thousands of square feet. And it's
Hmm.
an interesting question that, again, not even going to the individuals themselves, just the AI landscape and how it actually works, the realities of it. It's an interesting question because I think there isn't a uh, element of life that doesn't bring into question some sort of morality or
Right.
moral judgment, where you're sort of questioning yourself and is it right? There's no perfect answer to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because we won't really question it that deeply or wonder what the aftermath is going to be until it starts to become a real issue.
Hmm.
Um, Man, it's challenging. I would say it really depends on the individual,
Hmm.
what's their use case, because you kind of have to find your why.
Hmm.
If you're using it ultimately to do something good, you're offsetting something in the background that's happening negatively, versus like you were saying about earlier, where people have been using social media for the longest time to do nothing really, right? Just
Right.
consume content.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, that consumption is also consuming something on the back end as well. So it's sort of input and output. You mentioned it earlier about garbage in, garbage out,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So are we using it to create value, or are we just using it to consume and ultimately feed the engine even more, and also feed into those people, whether you like them or not, but feed into how that engine works. So I think it's up to the individual. We often feel like these um, corporations or technologies are so big that we have so little say. But I think every individual, as long as how you're using it, whether it's for yourself as an individual, or for what you're trying to create for others, you just have to have that surety that you're using it for something good, and that your input will also produce something positive on the output as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. That it really boils down to the individual at the end of the day. Um, and everybody would have a lens through which they see these things, because these are difficult conversations, and there is no clear-cut, answer around it. I know of people who don't use any of the meta platforms for the same reasons we're talking about, because they don't trust Mark Zuckerberg. And so they don't have WhatsApp, they don't have Facebook, they don't have Instagram, they don't have anything related to that's remotely attached to Mark Zuckerberg on it. They will not invest in Meta stock, even if Meta stock rises to $1,000 per share tomorrow, for that reason. And there are people who, you know, need to know how materials are sourced for the chocolate that they buy in order for them to be able to consume it. Because if you track the supply chain, you realize that in some cases it's being tracked to some villages in Africa where young people are being exploited. Exploitation is going on in terms of labor, and they're not getting paid well. And they are working all of this, and the people are using the cocoa, and then this is now being exported and transformed to create the chocolate bars that we eat. And so, if you want to track the supply chain of most things, you realize that there's something in the pipeline somewhere where some ethical values are being challenged. And so that's why it boils down to the individual. But like Joseph was saying too, that I mean, at your level, because again, we don't have a full visibility into all of these things. We don't have a full visibility into supply chains of the for the products that we wear on our bodies, for the food that we eat, and so on. And so it's really based on how much knowledge you have of it. What do you want to make of that knowledge? What can you do at your own level to create some impact in the world, some good in the world? Again, it's going to be like at an individual level what people choose to do.
It's been a very, very, very compelling discussion. Exploring, questions many people ask or think about, what AI is and how we can use it on a day to day, the security of it, or just how, it impacts people's lives on a day to day. As we wrap up here, how can people connect with you guys? If they would like to chop it up, talk more, or and like I said, Joe, you and financial aid, I'm pretty sure that so we really get, oh, with bro, like what's going on right now?
They
Help
can
me
they
out
can
here, bro.
expect
Help me
me to
out.
have all the answers.
Yeah, of course. With AI, you should.
Definitely.
Or Talbot, you and BT builders,
Hmm.
how can people reach out there, or you just
Yeah.
general to ask about AI, or career help advice, stuff like that. And
Yeah.
as you're answering that, please add, are you optimistic or pessimistic about where we're headed with AI and why?
Okay, that's a good one. So in terms of how people can connect, um, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn, Tabot Tambe. On LinkedIn, Instagram, it's the same name, Tabot Tambe. Send me an invite, a LinkedIn invite. More than happy to respond. I love connecting with people. There was something I started doing a couple of years back where every month I'll just open up my calendar and I'll put up a LinkedIn post and say, hey, I've blocked out 30-minute slots for this month. Anybody who wants to reach out to discuss anything, product, entrepreneurship, technology, education, hit me up. Boy, oh boy, I ended up almost regretting it because the number of people who reached out, I couldn't
Mhm.
believe.
You
People
almost
reached.
wanted to make an AI agent just to
Exactly. I
offload
almost
all
want to make
that.
an AI
Yeah.
agent to upload that to the AI agent. I found myself doing back-to-back calls, 30 minutes. I'm like asking myself, God, who sent me to do this? But then it was great because I derive energy, like how they say what gives you energy and what takes energy. I get energy from having conversations with people. And, AK, I told you that I love having these conversations and, like this. It gives me energy. And so getting to talk to random people who have now become my friends, like somebody reached out to me from Georgetown University. I had somebody who reached out to me from Amazon. The person was exploring opportunities at Capital One. Now he works for Capital One because I was able to provide a referral for him and I walked him through the preparation for the interview process and he got a job now as a PM at Capital One. So I've been able to meet, somebody reached out to me from France to talk about what they were exploring and so just listening to people and the challenges they are facing and walking them through things, it gives me a lot of joy. So reach out to me, folks. Reach out to me. I'm not hard to find. I don't hoard knowledge because I'm also somebody who has been richly blessed to have mentors who pour into me. And so with the measure that people pour into me, I'm also willing to pour into other people. So Tabot Ari Tambe on LinkedIn, Tabot Ari Tambe on Instagram. Send me an invite. I'll be happy to accept that and we can keep the conversation going. For parents who are interested in having their kids enroll in Bitsy Builders, we have the summer boot camp. It's coming up. We'll be starting around the end of June. We do have actually a pre-summer hangout coming up on Saturday where we're taking the kids to Sky Zone, to go jump on the trampoline and have some fun. And the reason why we're doing that is because most of them have never really met themselves in person since they, meet on Zoom and everything. So we are building this form of community networking aspect, even for the kids, where they can be able to socialize, get to meet each other in person, so take them off Zoom and have in-person conversations and playtime and all of that because it also helps to enhance learning. And so we're meeting at Sky Zone on Saturday with the kids. We'll have an amazing time, 3 hours, 2 hours jumping on the trampolines and all whatnot, and then 1 hour, to have some food and drinks and everything, and then we head home. And we plan to maintain a cadence for after learning, they get to meet, play, and then go back to learning and all of that stuff. So reach out to us. Bitsy Builders is the name, bitsybuilders.com, and we'll be happy to get your kid enrolled in the program. Now to the question. I'm optimistic, I'm or pessimistic about the future and where things are going and why. I'm optimistic. I'm not. I think I'm really optimistic about the future, and the reason is because, like I mentioned, with every wave of innovation that has come, yes, it led to the loss of some types of jobs, but at the same time, it also created opportunities that never existed before. When you look at the way movies were created in the past, you needed a room of writers in Hollywood, and breaking into that industry was very difficult. Now there are models, AI models. I think it's Sora or something like that. I haven't really explored that yet, but I plan to at some point where you can actually generate, amazing worlds and video and tell stories and do really creative things. And so it democratizes the opportunity for people to be able to come up with their own movies and documentaries and all whatnot. So it's creating opportunities in the creative space, the creator economy. You saw what Kai Sanat is doing with, Streamers University. Creators, that's a whole industry in itself now. Young people are getting jobs and opportunities that were previously not available. So there's going to be a lot that will happen in the creative space. Even in terms of the podcast we have today, the format we have today with podcasting, AK, it gives you opportunities to take this to levels that probably you did not even think about, with AI. And so I believe there'll be a lot of opportunities that will be created from it, where I think Joseph mentioned this, where people would have like one man, two man businesses and side gigs that would be generating revenues in the six figures on the side and will require minimal attention because they'll have AI agents working for them, and doing all of the things that they would have probably needed to do while they can then focus on other things. I also see opportunities in it clawing back some time that we are, because in America we work a lot. I lived in Mauritius for 2 years, and the life there is different. People have a lot of time to go to the beach and spend with their families. By 5 p.m., people are closing their stores and going to the beach and taking, having downtime. For us here, our weekends are like our weekdays. It's crazy. It's until you leave the US and then you realize that, my goodness, what have I been in?
You're
You
actually
know,
supposed to have time off work. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
Have time to play with your kids, be
Hmm.
present in your kids' life, be able to switch off and log off completely and be present with the family. So I believe that AI will help people to become more efficient, where it also leads to them gaining back time that they would have spent trying to figure things out in terms of work. And they can now use that time to be present with family and friends, because life is really not all about work. You also have to think about your mental well-being, your social, emotional well-being, and all of that. And so I believe the efficiencies that we're going to get back from AI would reduce costs and also enable people to be more efficient, where they can get back some of that time to plow it into community service, volunteering, spending time with family, travel, seeing the world, and all whatnot. So I'm very positive, I'm optimistic and very bullish about the future that we are heading into.
Yeah. And for myself, it's short and sweet. I abandoned Instagram once upon a time, so you'll probably only find me on LinkedIn, Joe Kasui on LinkedIn. And I have to say, I'm optimistic as well. And just piggybacking off that point, I mentioned it to AK earlier. I think particularly about the independent business owners, small business owners, because again, they say when you operate in that space, you wear so many hats, you're doing so many
Mhm.
things, all your time is business,
Yep.
from Monday through Sunday, no time off. But now using those AI tools, getting to regain that time and live life again,
Yeah.
right, while also simultaneously making your business more efficient, being able to scale up, and grow that sort of revenue. I also think, when we mentioned about education, all those opportunities it's going to give for individuals to have access to better education. I'm particularly interested to see what happens when you get more tailored learning. You have a sort of AI agent that acts as a tutor so that you're learning at your own pace. We
Yep.
often talk about in the education space how one size does not fit all, right? When you have students in a classroom,
Yep.
one method of teaching, everybody has a different method of learning. But now, when you infuse AI, everybody can go at their pace while also gaining that mastery to where they all get to the same destination.
Yes.
I also think about, again, just what it means as far as opportunities for developing countries. We talked a lot about Africa, the creator economy. You mentioned it. I remember when I lived in South Africa, that was one of the things that seems so ironic. You have these people who are just naturally creative, whether it's comedy, dance, storytelling, with little investment from the government to actually kickstart that. But now with the AI and the tools, that story can be brought to the world. There's
Yes.
less barriers, right?
Mhm.
So that's probably the things that are most exciting. We obviously then worry about the realities. Data privacy comes to mind, the ethics. You spoke earlier about that error um, with the model and the bias, and sort of hallucinations. So we worry about that. But again, given the technical proficiency of a lot of the engineers, those are things they're working on. So it's going to get better. We've already seen that from last year when we believe that's the first time we started talking about ChatGPT, to this year, and now we're talking about video generation, whether it's Sora or VO with Google. So the pace of things being able to be sort of perfected is happening so much faster than anything previously. So even in the light of things being potentially scary, they can also get better faster. And then, again, going back to that point where we talked about government and regulation, just trying to keep those checks and balances so that the there are more positives than negatives that come out of this.
Yeah.
So it's still promising. And again, don't wait. Don't wait. Use the tools, even if it's just in your personal life first, just to try to test it out. How do I schedule a trip or learn more information about this? And then also to try to use it in your workspace.
Yes.
Even for myself, I'm not waiting until we get a directive from, the leadership that says, oh, we're starting to use AI and this is how you should use it. Because by then, like they say with almost any technology, well, they say it about the news. By the time you read the headline, it's old news.
Yes.
So by the time they come and tell you in the office, hey guys, AI, you should start using it, there's probably already in the background, they're figured out who's going to be replaced. How do we get cost savings? So jump on the bandwagon now, embrace it. The best thing you can do is personalize it. Find your best use cases as to why you want to use it, how it's going to add value for you. And then ultimately, you'll probably even be able to add value for other people. And then that generates a whole different conversation about you didn't think you were going to be someone who had a side hustle. Now you do. You didn't think about entrepreneurship. Now you are, and etc. So there's probably more value to be had. We just have to find it for ourselves and then ultimately spread that value to other people.
Jeez. How can I? Man, listen, you already concluded the podcast, man. You know what I mean? You just ground it. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's nothing else you will say after that. So anyways, to our listeners, this conversation continues with you. So how is AI affecting you at work or in your personal life? Just like, Talbot, from this conversation, you could tell he's not just using it at Capital One. He's using it at B2 Builders and also on a day-to-day basis. Even Joe himself, it's not just at work, but also on a day-to-day to make sure that, the data that he's mining, it's fitting to what he needs on, again, on that day-to-day on basis. And for me, this whole episode is sponsored by AI in itself.
from notes to transcripts.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, what questions should you be asking, that will help you explore, AI and what AI brings in the future? Please reach out to, Talbot or Joe or myself, if you want to be part of this conversation, be it on the forefront, like, as we're doing right now, or, the background. You got their links on their LinkedIn's. It'll be in the show notes. Please reach out. I don't know if Talbot, you're still offering those, that calendar thing that you mentioned.
It's gonna blow up now.
They should follow me for now, and then in the future, when I offer it, they can take advantage of it.
That was good. Maybe Joe, you should add your order because it's a financial aid questions.
By then, you might be talking with an AI generated version of him.
There you go.
It's still him providing the knowledge. So don't be too alarmed.
Yeah.
Love it. But anyways, until next time, remember the future isn't something that happens to us. It's something we actively shape together. So I'm your host, Uncle AK, and man, keep aspiring, keep learning. Remember, man, your brain dies when you refuse to feed it. So keep feeding, keep learning, and keep being you. Again, I'm Uncle AK. Joe, Talbot, thank you guys for this conversation. Let's do it again.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any other topics that we deem necessary for the masses. So catch you guys on the next one. Peace.